everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Universe Within podcast. This episode of the show is being sponsored by my friends over at a company called Real Mushrooms, realmushrooms.com. Sky Chilton and his father, Jeff Chilton. I interviewed Jeff a number of episodes ago. Really interesting guys. I really enjoyed that conversation with Jeff. And it's a company that sells and distributes medicinal mushrooms in powder or capsule form. I was really happy to have these guys come on. I think they were very much in alignment with the values of the podcast. As you all know, a big part of this podcast is about plant medicine, holistic medicine, and I think the benefits of medicinal mushrooms are truly fantastic, and I think there's really a growing body of work that's really showing and alluding to all of the amazing properties that mushrooms have. They sell a lot of different mushrooms, things you've probably heard of, like reishi, chaga, lion's mane, turkey tail, cordyceps. Those are all mushrooms I work with. They're part of what I consider for myself a really holistic supplement regime. And the thing I really love about their company, not only are they really good guys, I think they're really ethical guys, but the product is really amazing. It's all 100% mushrooms. They're organic, and that's really rare. For better, for worse, the supplement industry is highly unregulated, and so often when you get supplements, you don't necessarily know what you're getting. You may be getting some mushroom, you may be getting a bunch of fillers and other things. Oftentimes, even when you're buying what may be a mushroom, it may not have any of that mushroom in it at all, unfortunately. Even some of the big, I think even the biggest company that sells mushrooms, actually it's not the fruiting body, not the mushroom itself. It's the mycelial, which is grown on grain, and then those things are mixed up and then sold in a supplement form. So not only you're not getting the mushroom itself, you're getting the mycelium mixed with grain. So it's one of the amazing things of Real Mushrooms is it's exactly that. It's real mushrooms. So it's 100% mushrooms, organic. So you know you're getting a really good product. You're getting the actual fruiting body, the mushroom itself, 100% of that. And again, just really great guys. I'm really happy to have them on and supporting this podcast. So if you'd like a really good product, you'd like to start working with medicinal mushrooms, check out their site, realmushrooms.com. And also listeners of this show, if you go to their site, realmushrooms.com/universe, you get 25% off your first order, which is a really good deal. And I think once you start working and tasting their products, you'll really see and feel a big difference. So thank you to them. And I think that's it. And without further ado, here is the intro to the show. On this episode of the podcast, I am releasing an interview that I did with a new friend of mine whose name is Shona Home. If you are a regular listener of this podcast, you may recognize that name. I had her on the podcast a few episodes ago, and I really enjoyed that conversation. When we finished that conversation, she invited me onto her podcast, which is called The Mushrooms Apprentice. And so I'm releasing that interview that I did with her on my podcast. I really enjoyed the interview with Shona when she was on mine, and I really enjoyed going on her podcast and speaking with her. We got into a lot of interesting topics. We spoke about my life, although maybe that's not so interesting, but kind of my background, my time in the jungle, a lot about plants, plant medicine, specifically tobacco, a lot of my work with trees, the traditional process that I'm working with, which is doing a dieta, prolonged periods of isolation, of fasting, of ingesting one particular tree, kind of the wisdom of trees, different cosmovisions, indigenous cosmovisions of the Amazon, cosmovisions of Europe, of the West. And I think it was a really fascinating conversation. I think she's an amazing woman, and she's beautiful as an interviewer and an interviewee, both. So I hope you really enjoy this conversation. When this episode is released, if you're interested in working with myself and my colleague Merav Artzi, our next plant dieta is in the Sacred Valley of Peru in November. Although already we're almost sold out for that retreat. So I imagine by the time this is published, we will be sold out. We're still trying to finalize our schedule for the next year, but most likely we'll be back in the Sacred Valley of Peru 2 times, probably in Portugal once or twice, and hopefully Ireland as well. We hope to have the schedule finalized in the next few months, so you can always keep an eye out on my website and my social media profiles, Instagram and Facebook, for a more updated schedule. And then, as always, if you're able to support this podcast, that's a really big help to me. Patreon is a really good option. It's a website. You can sign up for as little as $1 a month. There's different tiers you can sign up for. Those tiers give you different things back, things like early access to shows, bonus material, Q&As. To all the people supporting that way, thank you very much for your help. I really appreciate it. And if you're able to do that, thank you very much in advance. If you're not able to do that, as always, helping with the algorithms is a really big help. So if you're viewing this on YouTube or Rumble, subscribing to the show, turning on the notification bell, liking the video, and if you're listening to this on Apple Podcast or Spotify, leaving a starred rating and a short review. One quick note with this episode, it's audio only. So if you're viewing this on YouTube or Rumble, there's no picture. It's just audio. So I think that's it. Without further ado, here is the conversation that I had with Shona Home.
Running out from the maze, running out of the maze today. Running out from the maze, running out from the maze, running out from the maze today. I'm running out from the maze, running out from the maze, run out of the maze today.
Welcome to the Mushrooms Apprentice. My guest today is Jason Grechanik. Early in his 20s, Jason began to develop a keen interest in plants as food, as nutrition, as life, and as medicine. He began learning holistic systems of medicine such as herbalism, traditional Chinese medicine, Ayurveda, and nutrition. That curiosity eventually led him to the Amazon, where he began to work with plants to learn traditional ways of healing. His experience combines many different modalities of working with plants, the plants of the Amazon and the ways in which the peoples of the Amazon work with them have had a revelatory effect on his life. Jason came to work at the Ayahuasca Healing Center, Temple of the Way of Light, in 2012, where he would stay for nearly a decade. After having worked with ayahuasca quite extensively, he began the process of dieting plants. He has dieted in the Shipibo tradition and began working with Maestro Ernesto Garcia Torres in 2013, delving deep into the world of dieting. Through a prolonged apprenticeship and training involving prolonged isolation, fasting, and dieting of plants, he was given the blessing to begin working plants. After working for some time as a tabaquero, he was eventually given the ability to administer diets, to share in the tradition from which he had learned and which has taught him so much. He has been living, learning, and working in Peru for the last 10 years. He currently runs diets in the Sacred Valley of Peru and abroad. Jason works through the medium of the master plant tobacco and with tree medicines from the Amazon rainforest, and increasingly with trees from North America and Europe. Jason created a podcast called the Universe Within podcast, available on all major platforms. In the past decade, he has helped guide over 1,000 people in ceremonies. I highly recommend you listen to his podcast. You can find it on YouTube. It's the Universe Within podcast. And you can also go to his website, nicotianarustica.org, and I will have all the links in the details here. So welcome, Jason.
Thank you so much for having me, Shona. I realized I probably should have put a shorter bio on my website.
Oh, no, no, no. I love this kind of thing. And I am always so fascinated when I talk to people about how they found their way to where they are today. And as I was saying to you earlier, you really, I mean, you interviewed me for your podcast, and I was so struck by the depth and the thought behind the questions that you asked, and just your presence as a man. And I just thought this person's a very old soul. You have that sense about you, and to be drawn to this in your 20s also, I think speaks volumes. And so, tell me first about just your childhood and how you were raised, because my goodness, how did you find your way to all of this? What were the foundational beginnings, as it were, for you?
Well, it was funny. A couple months ago, I think because I have this podcast, I kind of have a social media presence now, which I didn't before. And I think you mentioned when I was interviewing you, kind of how toxic in a way some of these platforms can be. And I was posting my podcast to one of these Facebook forums, and I got this reply that said, "Your show seems great, but I can't take anyone seriously who gives themselves the middle name Sadhana. Like, what arrogance!" And and I was thinking, well, that's interesting, but I actually didn't give myself that name. It's my legal name. It was given to me by my parents. Because interestingly, I was born in Sri Lanka, and my parents, I think, were hippies. It was during the hippie days, and they were traveling, and I happened to be born there. And it was actually given to me by someone who studies the stars. And interestingly, I guess as life would have it, it became quite meaningful in a way, and I think very much probably helped to lead me on this path, which, much like you were saying, perhaps is a type of sadhana, a type of practice, a type of searching. I think I had an interesting childhood, in that my father was quite an interesting guy. My parents were divorced, and I spent the summers with him, interestingly, in Virginia, where you're coming from, very, very close to you. Um, which is also an interesting state too. It's very close to Washington, D.C., so it's very cosmopolitan in that way, and yet it's also very pure. Like, it has a lot of really amazing nature, which I think growing up, I kind of grew up in the woods, and so I took it for granted. But the more I traveled around the world, I also realized how unique it is. I spent a long time in the Amazon rainforest, and it was funny because often guests would come and they're like, "Well, this is such a foreign environment, and it's, jungle, and there's all these animals and kind of dangers." And I used to think, I don't know, it's really not that different from the woods I grew up in. I mean, it's a little more dense, a little more foreign, I guess, in a way, but it's woods, it's forest, and I was always very familiar with the forest. But my father traveled around a lot, and so in the summers I used to travel around with him, and he had a real, I think, interest in kind of far off places and indigenous cultures, old peoples, and so I think from an early age I was exposed to that, and there was something very fascinating to me, and I think something that also I realized, whether it was some innate calling or something in the stars, but I think there was always something I was really looking for. That I think on the one hand, I'm very grateful to have been born in the United States. I think it's an amazing country, and at the same time, I think there was something lacking there that I was searching for. I think something, maybe for lack of better words, in the realm of spirit. And it's why I was also very interested in, I studied a lot about the North Native American traditions, because that was kind of the closest thing to where I was living that somehow resonated with me. And so I guess, long story short, that really kind of led me across the world. I ended up traveling the world for 2 years, doing all sorts of different practices, and I've been very much drawn to kind of esoteric practices, Eastern philosophy, martial arts, yoga. I mean, you name it, I've probably tried it. But I think in all of those paths that there again was an element that I felt these paths were speaking of, but that somehow maybe just for my own lack of I don't know, ability, I felt like I wasn't tapping into something deeper that I was looking for. And I think shamanism was always something that really resonated with me, but it always seemed very foreign and very far away. And like, how does one begin to do that? And that led me around the world looking for that. And then eventually I wound up in the Amazon due to a very strong calling and specifically to work with ayahuasca. And that was, I don't know, maybe 15 years ago now. And that really, that medicine particular and that way of being, that way of interacting with plants, I think in the bio, as I said, had a very revelatory effect. It was very enlightening. It really shed light on something that I was deeply looking for. And then that curiosity really led me to stay. And kind of a year turned into 5 years, to 10 years, to however long now, 15 years. And it really it gave me a much deeper experiential understanding of plants, which is something that I was so fascinated by. Um, this relational aspect of plants, this ability for plants to teach us to um, as a teacher, as a being that can actually that has wisdom and can impart that wisdom and really live through us and become a kind of a teacher of the highest order and really allow us to embody that wisdom, which something I think for me that was always very fascinating was seeing all of these commonalities of cultures all over the world. Like it seemed to me they were all speaking of the same thing, pointing to the same thing. Um, and this work of plants, specifically in this way that I began working, really opened that door to me, and it was fascinating. And I never imagined I would be doing this work, or I had no plans to do it, but it just kind of unfolded. And still, it seems a bit strange at times, but it's just something that kind of naturally unfolded. People started coming to me and asking me and looking for things, and I just began sharing the little bit that I knew. And but over time, it's become a path that somehow has become my path now.
Yeah, this is just fascinating. Also, the idea that you can speak with a plant, that a plant can teach you. And I would like to know when you were learning this, what were you taught as the right approach to what how would you call it, like gaining the trust of a plant, if it as it were, or cultivating relationship with a plant? How does that work?
I mean, I would imagine to many people, it seems like quite a foreign concept that you can speak to a plant. But in the same way that I don't think it's a foreign concept that you can speak to a human being, we all accept that as a reality. Um, it's just, I think, as Aldous Huxley said, there's different doors of realities, and we see reality in a certain way that's very much based on who we are, which is very much based on our culture, our stories, our worldview, our cosmovision. And a lot of the cultures we come from, almost all of the cultures we come from, whether you're in the West, the East, the North, the South, it really doesn't matter. Most cultures have lost that cosmovision. And yet in their root, they all had that cosmovision that all of life had the ability to speak. And not even necessarily in the sense of words, but that they could speak and that could be intuited, that could be learned. I think, more and more, the more kind of Western scientific research that's done on plants, there's, I think, more and more knowledge that's coming out that shows that plants are able to communicate. Obviously, not in the ways that humans communicate because they're not humans. We communicate in a certain way. An animal communicates in a certain way. Plants communicate in certain ways. But even something like when you drink chamomile tea at night. Like you may not think that you're communicating with chamomile, but there is a certain communication that's happening, that there's something that's within you that's reaching out in that ritual of heating hot water, of whether you gathered the flowers yourself or you bought them at Whole Foods, alchemically preparing that plant, and then you enter a relationship with it. You're drinking it. You're feeling some effect from it, which is why you're drinking it. If you didn't, you wouldn't be drinking it. You wouldn't go through that time. There's some physiological effect that you're having. There could be some effect from the ritualistic use of the preparation, the sitting down on a couch, the feeling the warmth, the calming of your tummy, of your stomach, perhaps aiding you to sleep. All of those, I think, could be said is a form of communication that you're entering with that plant. Um, in a lot of these more traditional cultures, they also had certain plants which they may generically call something like a master plant, and a plant that really had the ability to open that doorway of perception in a much different way, in a much more visceral way, in a much stronger way. Plants like ayahuasca, plants like tobacco, plants like toei, plants like wachuma, San Pedro, plants like, it's not really a plant, but something like psilocybin, that there were these plants or fungi that had the ability to really, really, in a very profound way, open the doors of perception in a much different way. And so for me, that really happened in a very profound way that the first time I took ayahuasca. I mean, without going into too much detail, I mean, I was in other dimensions, I was in other planets, I was in other universes. I mean, it, things that I couldn't even write off as figments of my imagination, because my imagination had never been to these places. They weren't even things I could imagine. I mean, literally seeing things, seeing beings, seeing entities, and so in that way, it really opened those doors of perception. So in a traditional sense, it could be seen that all plants have a consciousness. All plants are a teacher, much like you go to a university and you have your social studies teacher, you have your mathematics teacher, you have your chemistry teacher. Every plant is its own teacher. It has its own library. It's like a university that you can learn from. Um, and so when you enter a relationship with that plant in a traditional sense, usually you're doing it in some sort of ritualistic sense to really be able to connect with that plant. And I guess to kind of answer your question, I would say a really common theme that's spoken of when you want to learn from a plant is this idea of reciprocity, that if you're wanting to receive from that plant, you have to be willing to give. It's kind of a law of nature that for every action, there's a reaction. Nothing is free. So what are you willing to give to receive that teaching? Usually in a more traditional sense, that would involve different practices like fasting, isolation, deprivation, sensory deprivation, and often not only ingesting the plant that you want to learn from, but also ingesting one of these other master plants that really opens those doors to allow you to connect in a much deeper way. And very often, the way these plants would teach would be in the dream space. Kind of the dream space and the shamanic space, I think, are one and the same. They're symbiotic, which is interesting because it means we actually all have access to that space. You know, we spend literally a third of our lives in that space. It's just usually we write it off as something that's not really important. It's just something we have to do in order to wake up. And yet, in these traditional cultures, they said there's a reason that we're dreaming every night. There's obviously a physiological effect. There's rest. There's recovery. But it's literally an altered state of consciousness where we're not in our body. We have the ability to shamanically travel, to go to different dimensions, to go to different realms, to receive wisdom of these plants. And so in that space, we have that ability. Um, Also, I think the last time we talked, there was some construction going on. So if you hear banging in the background, it's still going on. So, but yeah, I guess a long answer to your question is usually there was some form of a ritual, of a ceremony, usually through a prolonged period of time, of ingesting a certain plant in a certain structure, usually with a human teacher as well, guiding that, that would allow you to experientially learn from that plant, ultimately in order to embody its wisdom.
Yes.
But because if we don't embody the wisdom, it's just an ephemeral experience, and it's something of the mind. And I think that's something that for a lot of Western-minded people, it's a bit tricky to break that barrier as well, because I think, and certainly I've been there myself, is I wanted to understand everything on the level of the mind, but ultimately that knowledge has to be embodied. And so I think there's a lot of people who can speak to these experiences also on the level of the mind, and there's a benefit to that. But the true benefit comes when it's embodied, when it lives through you, through your words, through your actions, through literally how you weave yourself into this world, much like a tree spreading its roots. That's where it's able to have the real effect.
Yes. Yes. This is just fascinating. I'm curious about the isolation piece with this because it makes me think of the training of the seer poets of old Ireland, and their training was done in darkness, away from the daily activities, so they could focus fully on the task at hand. And so I'm just curious to know, what did that isolation look like as part of this training?
Well, traditionally you would do it in nature, whether that's in the Amazon jungle or the Andes Mountains, but really removing yourself away from people. Nowadays, it can still be done in nature, but it can also be done in the confines of a space that's somewhat secluded from the outside world, but where there's still maybe comforts, a bed, a room, as opposed to like getting eaten alive in the Amazon jungle. Although there's a real experience to that as well, and a real learning that comes with that also. Um, but the idea is just as you said, the diet is about that's what these are usually called, a dieta, or to diet a plant. It's really to enter that relationship with the plant where it's really just you and the plant and nothing else. Because anything else that's coming in, then that becomes part of your dieta, much like in life. If I'm reading a book, that's what's on my mind. That's what I'm taking in. If I'm listening to music, that's that's influencing me. It's evoking certain emotions. It's evoking certain feelings, certain memories, perhaps thoughts of the future. If I'm isolated and I have no contact other than what's around me, one, I'm forced to be in the present. I'm also forced to go within myself. So I'm also in that way forced to go into my past and my future. So usually in these processes, there's a process of cleaning, of clearing, of these plants really going in and working on us, cleaning us in the physical level. Most of these plants are also medicine. All these plants are medicine. Probably most people aren't familiar, but even our Western allopathic medicine systems are, I think, something still like 70% plant derived, whether it's derived naturally from an alkaloid in a plant or it's synthesized from something that's mimicking a plant. Traditionally, almost all medicine was plants. So plants have been medicine throughout time. So when we're ingesting a plant, it's literally healing us. It's cleaning us. Um, it also kind of archetypally represents this idea of going into the past, because if we are sick, that's coming from something of the past, certain patterns, certain ways that we've been. And then there's also this aspect of presence, where we're really present, we're really aware of what's around us, what's surrounding us. And so that idea of isolation really forces us into that present moment. There's nothing to distract ourselves with. I remember the first time I did a dieta, it was in a little kind of hut in the Amazon, and I was just pacing around this hut because I had nothing to do. And for most of us, that's very, very difficult. I mean, even just try doing nothing for one day. That can be very, very difficult. Imagine for a week, for a month, for 6 months, maybe. Um, and then there's also this aspect of future, which is this idea that what a lot of these plants are doing is you could say maybe on a more neurological level, on a more scientific level, it's neurogenesis, neuroplasticity. It's literally opening new ways of being, new ways of seeing the world. Um, if you wanted to look at like an astronomical way, it's literally opening new portholes. It's opening new wormholes. It's allowing you to see the world in a different way, not from that idea of Maya, from the old patterns, but from something new. In Christian's terminology, it's the apocalypse. The apocalypse has been very mistranslated, but it literally means it's not the end of time. It's the end of the world as we knew it. And it's the rebirth. It's the Christ being reborn to see the world in a new way. So it's not something to fear. It's something we're actually all looking for. And so that's a big aspect of those plants. So by being in isolation, that the plant has the ability to work on us physically, to heal us. It has the ability to teach us. And in that space of stillness, we're really able to be much better in tune with those very subtle layers of the teaching. Because often the teaching, it's not bombastic. It's not something that's in your face, like telling you, like, this is this or this is this. It's very subtle, much like a plant. They're much like the leaves of a plant or the flowers of a plant. They're very soft. They're very subtle. When you look at a plant swaying in the wind, there's something very gentle about it. It's not, something in your face. It's not like a movie that's telling you this is this and this is this. But as you tune yourself to those more subtle layers, there can be a very, very profound teaching that comes. And then also the dream space. So when you're in isolation, you're much more aware of your dream space. You're not being distracted. So you're very much aware of that space and the daydreaming space, because again, when you don't have anything to do, the entire day becomes almost like a waking dream. You're laying down, or you're laying in your hammock or your bed, and you're in a daydream space. So you're much more perceptive. You're much more open. So I think that's where the isolation aspect is really vital, because you're literally, it's just you and the plant and your consciousness. So there's nothing to take you out of that space.
Yes, yes. And in this modern culture, and this is worldwide, we are so overstimulated, and it's
Mhm.
artificial stimulation. It's radio waves, it's Wi-Fi, it's just constant programs and social media, all of this kind of thing. And so this is no small thing that you are speaking of. This is absolutely like an apocalypse to someone who's has no experience other than kind of what we've all most of us have been raised in. So I'm curious to hear about some of these plants that you've sat with and that have taught you. And so could you speak of a few of them?
Yeah, initially I did my training in the Amazon. That's where I lived for quite a number of years, and I would say most, for lack of better words, teachers, people who are doing this work, curanderos. I think most of them would say that all plants are teachers. But much like any herbalist or any doctor in a Western sense, you have your arsenal, you have your tools. No doctor, if they were telling the truth, would say, "I know all medicine." That's insane. That's impossible. You know the medicine that you know. You know the medicine that you've worked with. Um, in general, there tends to be certain plants, certain trees that are kind of universally seen as being very strong teachers, as very strong healers. Um, but really, all plants can be. In in the Amazon, a lot of the plants that they're working with to learn from tend to be trees. Interestingly, I have a birch tree behind me, and even in our Western traditions, in the Celtic tradition, in a lot of Northern European traditions, birch was seen as a teacher. It was seen as a plant of women, of fertility, of life, of birth. In some traditions, one of the first trees that God put on the planet. And it was also seen as having a soul, a spirit, physical medicine, spiritual medicine. And so in a lot of these traditions, it was trees. Symbolically, trees are very interesting, that they're very rooted into the earth. They're very rooted into the feminine, into the soil, into the darkness, into the womb. They grow out of the ground. They're embodied in this world, and then also they begin to branch out, branching into the realm of heaven, into the realm of the masculine, into the realm of spirit. And so they're seen as this bridge. Most trees also can literally carry a lot of wisdom. I mean, you have trees that are thousands of years old. Usually, trees can be much older than humans. So experientially, they've also experienced life in a frame of time and in a way that even more so than humans have. But it's seen that those trees are a teacher, and that every one of those trees, kind of like as I mentioned before, has its teaching. It has its spirit. It has its archetype. For certain people, those are anthropomorphized. They're embodied as a human. It could be a man. It could be a woman. It could be gendered. It usually embodies certain archetypes. Um, Maybe again speaking to more Western traditions that people would be familiar with. If you take a tree like the elder tree, for example, it's often in Scandinavia, it's called the Hildemord, the the mother elder or the grandmother, and it's often archetypally represented as a woman, as a grandmother, because it's seen that it embodies that feminine aspect. It's often associated with magic. It's associated with justice, with right and wrong, with good and bad. And elder also has a tremendous amount of physical healing. I mean, most people are probably familiar with drinking elderberry syrup when you're sick, or drinking elderflower teas to calm you down. But that tree has a tremendous amount of medicine on the physical level. And then on the spiritual level, that idea of a teacher, what can it teach? And usually that wisdom is still there. It's still present in some of the cultures that we come from. Um, and so through that kind of ritualistic use of it, one can actually learn what those qualities are of that tree to then really begin to embody them. So in the Amazon, it's mainly trees. That there are some plants that people diet as well, plants that are seen as very strong plants, but in general, it's a relationship with trees. You have all sorts of very very big, very strong trees, a lot of caspi trees like Rimo caspi, Renaco caspi, Huayra caspi, Renaco caspi, Bejaco caspi. You have trees like Ayahuma. You have trees like Chuchuasi. I mean, there's really a whole pharmacopoeia of trees that are seen as very strong teachers, and they all have their archetype. They all have their teaching, and they really help people to do this work. Um, People may not be familiar, but often if people have gone down to the Amazon, for example, to work with ayahuasca, and they're working with a traditional curandero or healer, uh, in general, those healers aren't getting their power, their knowledge from a plant like ayahuasca, for example. They're getting them from trees. They themselves have dieted these different trees, and those are their allies. Those are their doctors. Those are their medicines that they're calling upon in the ayahuasca ceremony via the medium of ayahuasca. Much like I was saying, it's opening their vision. It's allowing them to connect to these trees to really come in and do the work. So when they're calling upon these medicos, these doctors, they're calling upon these trees that they've worked with, because it's seen that these trees have the ability to heal people on the physical level. They have an ability to heal people on the mental emotional level, which is probably the main reason why most people are coming to ayahuasca ceremonies, is for mental emotional healing, maybe in modern terms, trauma or depression, anxiety, things like that. Um, and to heal in the realm of spirit, to really open that door, and to begin to experience the archetype of that tree, which is usually more if someone is wanting to do this work or have a deeper relationship to these plants. That's when they would be connecting more in that realm of spirit, not so much for physical or mental healing, but if they want to connect in order to learn from the tree, that's where that kind of third phase would be more prominent. I don't know if that made any sense. That was kind of a a long-winded answer.
Oh, it absolutely did. And it's interesting because early on in my retreats, I had a man come in from Sri Lanka. And before he came, because it was such a long trip, he planned to go. I was on the West Coast. He planned to go up to the Washington rainforest. And I suggested he maybe rent a little cabin there and spend some time. And so before he left, after he worked with me, I gave him some mushrooms to take with him. And so he was in his cabin and he did these mushrooms, and it was a very, very strong mushroom. And he ended up crawling outside and ended up at the base of this beautiful tree, this magnificent tree. And he said the tree started speaking to him and it
Mm,
told him, I am the reason why you came. You're
mm,
here to speak with me. And he was forever changed from that. I mean, he had a very long conversation with the spirit of that tree, completely unexpected. So, what you're talking about is tapping into the mystery of nature. And we're raised in this very commercialized culture that it's almost like nothing to see over here, folks. Back to work, everybody. Come on now, be productive. Not that there's anything wrong with being productive, but not at the expense of what is uh, an ancient relationship with the nature around us. Is
yeah,
there?
everything is in balance. We I think we often, and I think from a good place, we speak that the world is out of balance. From my experience, I don't see things that way. The world is always in balance. It may not be the balance that we want or that we wish for, but it's always in balance. Um, and kind of like that idea of reciprocity, like nothing is free, everything has a cost. And, there's a huge benefit to commercialism, towards capitalism, towards, no other system has pulled people out of poverty in a way that that system has. There's certainly nothing wrong with that. Quite the opposite. It's beautiful. It's amazing what it's done. But everything has a cost. And much like you said, we're surrounded by, like, what we're doing right now is an amazing facet of that technology, that 5G Wi-Fi, it's everywhere. It's allowing us to do this, and there's a cost to it. You see it in, especially kids. You see it in adults too. Is a very severe addiction to electronics. I mean, literally almost moving in a way where, and many people have spoken of this, where we're becoming inseparable, where we're, literally the screen is here now. Soon it's going to be even more close to us, and who knows where that goes. But again, nothing is free, so everything has a cost, and with that, what you're kind of talking about, that commercialization, which is amazing, there's a cost to that. And that cost, I think we're really seeing in people really feeling lost, really feeling depressed, feeling anxious, not feeling connected. Um, this may sound a little strange, but it was recounted to me by a very dear friend of mine who spent some time with this group of people called the Kogi in the Sierra Nevada of Colombia. Very fascinating people. And she was asking them about climate change, why there was climate change. And they said it was because people had forgotten their sexuality. So, there's probably a lot of ways of taking that. But the way I took it is there's something very true about that. We've forgotten who we are. We've forgotten nature. We've forgotten reality. Uh, you can't get away from these binary dynamics, that there is a man and there's a woman, there's good and bad. We talked about this in our podcast. And, all of these things that are taking us away from that, there is truth in that, but there's also not truth in that. And that's part of that idea of wisdom is understanding that difference. And when you don't understand the difference, you suffer. And there's no way around that. Suffering is suffering. And if you are suffering, I think part of what these plants begin to teach us is it's up to us to find a way out. And we can make all the excuses we want. We can blame, our parents and our society and all of these things. And we're probably justified in doing all of that. And we're still suffering.
Mhm.
So they're asking us to find a way out. Um, and so, very much as you said, it's a big struggle of our time. But interestingly, like I always like to think of someone like the Buddha, who allegedly was alive 2,500 years ago or something. But what he was addressing then was the same thing that people are experiencing now. He was addressing human suffering. So probably not that much has changed. I mean, certainly a lot has changed, but the essence of that is the same, that people were suffering. And it's also very true with these plants. One of the guys who I studied with, who I have a lot of respect for, his name is Amika. And it's kind of his role, his title. And it's also a bit what those Kogis were speaking about, which is a big part of our suffering. It comes because we've forgotten our roles. We've forgotten who we are. And what he would say is ultimately humans, and he's speaking about eons ago when these plants were given to humans by the gods, uh, is it was because ultimately even then humans had forgotten who we are and where we come from. And kind of, tying that back to that idea of reciprocity is the more we go in that direction, the more we go consuming, reaching for things that are outside of us, not being in isolation, not being connected to nature, it's fine. And there's a cost to that. And that cost where I think a lot of people are really beginning to feel. And the only remedy to that is to begin to step back, to move back to the other direction, to see all of this wisdom that was always around us. And it's not like it disappeared. It's always there. It's just we've moved away from it. And I think these plants in a way are really helping people to remember that, to be called back to it. It's not a new knowledge. It's a knowledge that's as old as humans. It's just calling us back. So, these ideas of speaking to plants or that plants have spirit or consciousness, it's not new ideas. It's far, far older than these more modern ideas that everything is robotic or reductionist or can be put in separate boxes. That's a very new theory. And I think also, like this guy Amika says, theories are great, but have they stood the test of time? And that theory, I think it's not really standing the test of time because it's not bringing people happiness. It's not bringing them harmony. And, as we say, the proof is in the pudding. So at some point we have to begin to look for what works and what resonates. And, I think it's also, I think in most people, if they're honest with themselves, there's something in them that resonates with that because there's something beautiful about that, that there is magic in the world, that we are connected to plants, to animals, that it's not just us, that there can be other beings, there can be other star systems, there can be other star beings, there can be fairies, there can be, whatever the worldview that you want to look at is, that magic does exist in the world. And I think when people get disconnected from that magic, um, they suffer. And so I think in a way people are being called back to that.
Yes, yes. The way I look at it is that nature is cyclical and we're nature. And so
Mhm.
sometimes there are storms, sometimes there is drought. And so within ourselves, I think we're in a kind of psychic drought, if you will. And remember a mushroom journey I took a few years ago where I was in conversation with what I call the fairy queen. And I always go in there, I'm like, it's a mess, we need your help, you know. So but I was saying to her, my goodness, like it's just awful what's going on and the suffering. And she said so succinctly, the consequence when one forgets.
Mm.
to your point. Exactly. And so we've forgotten, and I just think of the Pied Piper. Essentially, our minds have been steered away over to something else. And it's not working very well. But I see that as also, it's like that's opportunity. And this is part of it, that we get to screw up and then realize, okay, we got to figure this out. We got to figure a way back to ourselves, as it were. And so I just love what you are saying. Now, would you say is tobacco, would that be like your master teacher now, or how would you please speak about tobacco?
Yeah, tobacco's it's a fascinating plant. I mean, one, I think everyone's heard of tobacco, and there's a reason people have heard of tobacco is because when the Europeans and the Africans came to the New World, or to them the New World, um, it was such a commonly used medicine plant, a plant of medicine, of healing, of spirit, that they adopted it extremely quickly. Of all the plants, it was probably the most commonly used plant, and they found benefit of it. Even it's fascinating. Like if you go to a country like Brazil, which had a huge African influence into it, a lot of those kind of Afro-Brazilian traditions adopted tobacco right away, even though they didn't have it in mainly West Africa where they were coming from. They saw it as this master plant, this plant that allowed them to deepen their own spiritual practices. Same thing with the Europeans. I mean, it was kind of even by medical doctors, it was taken up right away as this amazing plant that could expel phlegm, for example, which was considered where the root of a lot of illness was laying dormant. Like any plant, I think over the years, I mean, you could look, for example, like wheat. I mean, how many people have gluten sensitivities now? Why is that? Is wheat a bad plant? No, I mean that's crazy to look at a plant as bad. Um, there's a reason that God put these plants on the earth. It's because they have a spirit, they have a soul, they have medicine. But for example, something like weed over the decades, the centuries of hybridization first, and then eventually genetically modification, raising a plant that literally is so weak that it can barely live on its own without fertilizers, without pesticides. And then ingesting that plant, I think most people's bodies are rejecting it. They're saying this isn't serving me. So it's actually a deeper intelligence of your body that's saying this isn't good for me. And that's happened to so many amazing plants. Something like cocaine. I mean, how many people use cocaine? I used to live in New York. The answer is a lot. If you don't think that's true, you probably haven't been in big cities for long enough. It's extremely used. I mean, look at the war on drugs. That's mainly a war on cocaine. I mean, the amount of lives that's lost, the amount of money, the amount of destruction, it's insane. But again, it's because we've labeled a plant as bad. And because we've kind of going back to this guy Mika, it's because we've lost the stories of these plants. When you lose the story, you lose the knowledge, you lose the deeper meaning, you lose the ritual, you lose why you're using it on a much, much deeper level. Because again, these plants are medicine, and like anything, you have to really understand it. You have to understand the story because there's healing codes that are built into the stories. There's knowledge, there's wisdom that's in those. And so something like cocaine, it's derived from a coca plant, which is considered a master plant, a plant that's very, very sacred to many, many people. Where I've been living the last few years in the Sacred Valley of Peru, to many people there, that's their main plant. I mean, they're not working with ayahuasca or these kind of very strong plants. They're working with coca, and that's all they need. That allows them to connect in a much deeper way to the realm of spirit. It's sacred to them. Um,
But they're not lining, lines on a mirror and snorting them, right? Like, could you just speak about how exactly they are working with the coca. It's a little bit different in the New
Well,
Yorker.
that's right, and that's because those stories have been forgotten, and the rituals, the rites, and then also the processing it, much like with wheat. The way that you extract cocaine from the coca plant, it's an extremely toxic process. You need all sorts of very harsh chemicals, kerosenes, and solvents, and all of those run off and into the water. They pollute the land. I mean, it's an extremely harsh process. But the only reason you would really do that again is because you've lost the story, you've lost the wisdom. The coca has everything that's needed. That's why it's perfect. That's why it's beautiful. That's why it was given in the form that it's given. But kind of in our madness and our dizziness, we've forgotten those stories. And so we think we can extract one thing from a plant, the good thing, and take that and multiply it and make it stronger. And we can get the same effects without any of the cost, but we can't. There is a cost. Um, and so it's kind of similar with tobacco, without going into too much detail, but it's been hybridized, it's been processed, it's been the alchemy that it was traditionally processed in has been lost. And the story, the rites, the ritual, even something like smoking, it's not a super common way of working with tobacco. Uh, you can make it into a paste, you can lick it, you can chew it, you can snort it as a powder, and ultimately you can drink it. That, like any plant, drinking it is the most powerful way of ingesting it. Um, Please, and in all seriousness, if anyone is listening, do not drink it because it's very strong and it can be deadly. So that's why I was saying all of these plants, you need a human, a guide who really knows how to prepare that plant, because all of these plants, like all medicine, they also have a toxicity. As Paracelsus, I think the 16th century Swiss physician, said, the difference between a medicine and a poison is in the dose. Again, that's kind of a reductionist way of seeing it. It's very true. Also, I think in the story and in the preparation and the alchemy of it as well. So if those things are not present, a plant can be toxic, and these stronger plants have more toxicity, even to the point of death. And that's true with any strong plant. And again, it's the same with any strong pharmaceutical. If you don't take it in the proper dose, if you take it with things that are counterindicated, you can die, and that's true with any strong plant. Um, but but tobacco, I mean, in the Americas, it was the most widely used medicine plant, not only in terms of physical healing, but in order to connect to spirit. Um, and so, yes, I worked a lot with ayahuasca. I've worked with a number of different plants, but for whatever reason, tobacco really called to me. I think the plant itself, it could be growing up in Virginia, the land of tobacco. Um, there's probably a lot of different reasons, but there was something that called me very strongly when I began working with it, and again, something that even went, I think, beyond my rational mind, that really called me to go back to it, and then to go back again and again, and eventually apprentice with that plant. And then even after that, as I said, it was never my intention to work with it, but it just started happening. And tobacco has been a very great teacher, and a very great doorway to, I think, the plant kingdom, and to connecting to plants in a much deeper level.
What
In
would
the
you
same way, like you described with psilocybin, and this guy who communicated with a tree. I mean, that probably happened. I mean, it could be a number of variables, but probably the primary variable was psilocybin. It opened those doorways for him to be able to communicate with it.
Yes, yes. What has tobacco taught you? What would be the main sort of teaching you would say you've received?
I think it's also part of that idea of remembering the story of these plants is also understanding the context in which they come from, the cultures that they come from, the way of living, the cosmovision that they come from. In many of these traditional cultures, it was, especially from the Amazon, it was said that tobacco was the first plant. In some of these stories, It was given directly by God to humans, like the Witoto, the Borda people would say that Buinaima, their creator God, gave tobacco to humans so that humans could dream like God dreamt the universe into creation. So for many people, it has that quality of the first plant and that the plant that connects us to all other plants. It's why people go, maybe even people have been listening, people who are listening to this have been to an ayahuasca ceremony and they saw maybe some of the people holding that ceremonial space working with tobacco, working with their pipe. Um, it's seen that tobacco allows people to connect to their other plants, much like I was mentioning, to the trees that they've worked with. It's a bridge that allows them to connect with that. Um, in a lot of these Amazonian cultures, their cosmovision may be contrary to other cosmovisions. It's also seen as a world of dark and light, that there are good forces in the world and there are evil forces in the world. There's bad forces in the world. Um, the world isn't just love and light and rainbows. And I think anyone, if they're really honest with themselves and they're not simply going by dogma or propaganda and they really look with their own eyes, you can see that. And again, that there's always reasons behind those things. It's not just to label someone as bad. You can also understand why that's there, to deeply understand that so that you can actually stop that bad, so that you can transmute it, so that you can overcome it. But unless you see it, unless you recognize it, there's nothing you can do with that. And ultimately you will be subjugated to that darkness. The path of light is the path of going into the darkness. And so a lot of these traditional cultures realize that you have to go into the darkness. You have to go into your darkness, into your shadow, into the darkness of the world so that you can truly stand in light, so that you can truly understand light. Because unless you understand darkness, you can't understand light. So tobacco was also seen as a plant of a lot of light, but that it was also a plant of warring, that it took you into this kind of shamanic battling. It took you into the underworld. It took you into the darkness so that you could emerge strong. It has a lot of qualities of being a warrior energy, of being a plant with light, of allowing you to see the world as it actually is, to see beyond the illusion, the delusion. I think a lot of integrity. I think maybe we briefly mentioned about this, and these are all rabbit holes that would probably be separate podcasts. But we spoke a little bit, I think, about the kind of delusion, the illusion that happened during the COVID pandemic. It was very interesting to me because I saw a lot of people who I knew who were working with ayahuasca who kind of went along with it hook, line, and sinker. Um, and I don't think that that's a coincidence. The medicine of ayahuasca, it's taking us into these ethereal realms, but it is very much other dimensionally in that sense of you can very much get lost in other dimensions. You can get lost in illusion. You can get lost in delusion. You need something, whether it's a practice or a medicine or a teacher, to be able to bring you back. That's something that I didn't see, for example, with the people I know who were working with tobacco. For them, there was something quite clear that was happening. It was quite simple to see, like something was off, something wasn't right. The words and the actions didn't match up. Um, and I think that's one of the powers of tobacco is to actually see through things, to see in a deeper level. Um, Prayer, like where you're coming from, a lot of the North Native Americans used tobacco because they said it carried our prayer to spirit. So it was used in that way. It was used to strengthen the word, to give power to the word. This idea that you can't lie with tobacco because it will come back to bite you. So it forces you in a way to be true, to be honest, to be in integrity, strength, clarity, groundedness. I think these are all kind of archetypal qualities of tobacco. Again, within that, there's the universe. All of these plants can give us access to whatever we need, to wherever we're at. But much like I was saying that each plant is a teacher, they tend to embody certain archetypes that tend to come through. All of these plants are going to work on all of us in a very personal way, in a way that's specifically tailored to us. And yet they tend to embody certain archetypes. And I think a lot of those are the archetypes of tobacco.
Mm. And so you teach this, yes? You teach people how to diet tobacco, am I right?
We work with tobacco and all sorts of plants. I mean, predominantly trees, but tobacco is, as I was saying, really the gateway to the trees. So usually when people come to work with us, people can come for all sorts of different reasons. They could be physically unwell, and so we're prescribing them a plant that's going to be good for whatever their physical sickness is. It could be they're mentally, emotionally unwell. They're depressed, they're anxious, they're lost. They they have a lot of trauma. They've been in a war, and so there can be other plants for those things. Um, Tobacco is usually mixed with the plant because it allows them to connect in a much deeper way, not only in the physical realm, the mental emotional realm, but also the spiritual realm. Basically, meaning that they're able to receive the wisdom of the plant that they're working with, so that it's not just because it also goes back to this idea of reciprocity. It's not just the plant doing something to them, it's them also having to work with the plant, having to learn from the plant. And then the plant is also asking them, okay, this is what I've shown you. Now it's up to you. Do you want to put one foot in front of the other? Do you want to embody this medicine? Because it's all contractual, it's all intentional. It's not going to do it for you. It's going to show you possibilities and then give you the option. You don't have to accept. It's up to you. But if you do accept, there's a benefit and there's a responsibility that comes with that. So it's also not free. It's asking us things, and that's going to be challenging as well. But ultimately, they're there for our benefit. So tobacco is the main medium that we're working with, but predominantly we're working with trees from the Amazon and more trees from North America and Europe. Um, I think for me it was always very interesting because I think I find myself kind of in this role of a bridge keeper. Like I'm not indigenous Amazonian, and yet I found myself very called to those people to learn from them because I felt kind of like we were speaking about with isolation. They had been isolated from outside influence, so they were better able to preserve this knowledge that through outside influence, a lot of people had forgotten. That knowledge isn't specific to the Amazon. Again, I think it's universal, but their way of working with it is very specific. Their cosmovision is very specific, and it was something that very much drew me into it. Um, and so, I learned through these amazing Amazonian teachers, not just human teachers, but plant teachers. Um, at the same time, I came from a different environment. And so at a certain point, there was also this, I think, deeper calling. And I think some was interestingly encouraged by my main physical teacher to begin working with the plants where I came from, um, to reconnect to those with this technology that I had been, in a way, gifted, that I had learned. To help people to connect to their own medicines, to their own trees, to plants and trees that are literally potentially in their backyard that they can develop a relationship with in a much different way than a plant that's halfway across the world. So um, again, maybe kind of a long answer, but yes, we're working with tobacco as the main medium to connect people much deeper to the plant kingdom, and predominantly what we're working with are trees.
Wow, that's wonderful. We are at the end of the first hour. I want to hear much more about the work you do. So we'll visit that in the second hour. And what is the best way for people to find you?
Probably the best way is my working website, which is nicotianarustica.org. Yeah, it's the Latin name for tobacco, specifically tobacco we're working with, nicotianarustica.org. And I also have a podcast called, which you were graciously on, called The Universe Within podcast, and you can find that on all the platforms, YouTube, Spotify, Apple.
And then you're on Facebook as well.
I'm also on Facebook, Instagram. I have yeah, a personal and podcast channel page, whatever they're called on there as well. But
Yeah.
probably my website is the best. Instagram, I guess, is also good. That's another good way as well.
Okay, wonderful,
Yeah.
wonderful. All right, so I will invite listeners to come to the mushroomsapprentice.com and subscribe and soak up more of this amazing man's wisdom. Hope you will join us. Welcome back. Oh, I'm so enjoying listening to you, Jason. I could listen to you for a few more hours. Well, let's hear more about the way you work. So, because you're also in Portugal, yes? So when people come to work with you, is it just in the Amazon or can they come to Portugal as well? How does that work?
Well, so I how to start this story. So originally I was working at quite a big ayahuasca center in the Peruvian Amazon called the Temple of the Way of Light. And that's kind of where I started working. I apprenticed outside of there, but that's where I started kind of beginning to work with tobacco, with ceremonies, with kind of helping people to clean them, mainly staff. And then I started giving some of my first dietas while I was there. I think something that I really learned from that place, which I think they did very well, was they really emphasized having women healers, and in the Amazon, it's very much a male dominated field. Uh, it's almost all men who I would say are working in this, and yet there are a few women, but it's quite rare. And so the center that I was working with, I think one of the really beautiful things they did is they always had women. And I think that's actually what initially drew me to that place is I think at the point in my life that I was at, I'd had a lot of male teachers, but I think I was really looking for a female teacher. Um, and interestingly, then my main teacher did become a man, but it was I think it was very important for me at that point in my life to also be exposed to female healers. Um, and I really saw the power of all the guests that came down of being able to have access to both. And so when I started working, it was something that I also wanted to call in. And so that happened when one of my colleagues, I proposed to her that we work together. And I think she was a little hesitant at the time, but I think in retrospect, I'm sure she's quite happy with the choice. So mainly I'm working with another woman. We did the same training, same lineage. And so we started working in the Amazon together. Then we ended up going to the Sacred Valley of Peru, where we worked for a long time. And then the pandemic happened. And so it was basically impossible for people to come in. We started getting some invites to go abroad and work. And, also this was a process of how do we do this? Can we do it? How does it work? Also, are we bringing Amazonian trees? Are we bringing trees from the Sacred Valley? Or are we going to start working with native trees? So I think that also started the process of working with native trees as well. So um, the last number of years, the Sacred Valley has been our base. So we hold a few retreats there every year. And then we've been getting invited to go abroad. So we've worked in New York for a few years. We worked in Ireland for a few years. We've worked in Israel. We've worked in Portugal. We've gone to Colorado in the U.S. Um, I'm probably forgetting a place or two, but yeah, we started traveling with that work, and so yeah, recently we just finished a retreat here in Portugal. So um, kind of the idea of going abroad is just to open the work up more to people who may not have the ability to fly all the way to Peru, which can be quite a journey for some people. And more now that we're working with trees that are more indigenous to these lands, European trees or trees that are indigenous to the United States, oh, Canada also. Um, I think there's something very beautiful in dieting the tree in the land where the tree comes from. So it gives people the opportunity to do that. And a big part, I can't remember if we spoke about this, but that was something that very much drew me to you. And on the recommendation of Kathy was the person who invited us first to Ireland to come and work. And it was there that I was very much inspired by this Celtic tradition because trees were very much, I at least saw, built and I mean, literally into their language. But just the medicine, the myth, the spiritual aspect of the trees, that they were seen as teachers, they were seen as having individual spirits. And what I saw is this is what I had learned in the Amazon, and yet it was also in this more Western culture, kind of hiding away, at least for me. But the more I looked into it, it was the same way that I had been working. And so I think it really gave me a framework to much better be able to take the work out of the Amazon and apply it in a way to the trees, to the land, to the people of more of the Western world.
Yeah, I would say people are thirsting for this, many of them, that really it's so elementary in terms of that much needed connection that has to happen for people. And it's through that, I think, that real deep healing can then begin because people feel so disconnected, because they are, many of them. And it has tremendous it's detrimental psychically to people because there's only so much satisfaction one can get in a very sort of superficial framework in which we find ourselves. You hear of the midlife crisis, people have done kind of everything right, quote unquote. They went to college and they got the job and they excelled and they got the house and the family, and they did all that, but they're somehow empty because they've lost, if they ever had, that deeper connection to the natural world. And the trees most certainly are these powerful teachers. My goodness, I've had that experience myself.
And that's a big part of religion. I think in a lot of the Western world, religion is, and again, you can justifiably argue that it's had a negative impact on people, but it's also had a huge positive impact on people. And our societies have become very secular and they become very non-religious, very atheistic. Um, and again, without going, too political, but even that idea of the pandemic, for me, it was very obvious the reason that could have such a strong hold on people is because people had lost religion. They'd lost their connection to God, that we look to our source of authority in man, in humans, that humans are the highest form of knowledge and not something that's deeper than that. Even in the US, it's such a beautiful thing. Our rights are not given to us by man, which is completely unique. And I think people really don't understand the power of that. Your rights are given to you by God.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a revolutionary act of seeing the world. Because if they're given to you by man, then they can be taken away by man, and man can dictate you to your rights. If they're given to you by God, then man can't take away your rights. They're God-given. They're inalienable. They're literally, it's a birthright. Simply by being born, you have rights. And um, so yeah, it's I kind of lost my train of thought there, but it's such a powerful thing to I think to really understand that. And as you were saying, it's oh, it was about religion. This idea that as we become disconnected to religion, there is a suffering that comes from that. Certainly religion has been used to dominate, to separate, to control, but that's the human aspect of religion. That's not the innate aspect of religion, because religion innate form is universal. It's beyond the realm of man. It's the realm of spirit. And as we become disconnected from that spirit, as we become disconnected from religion, we suffer. It's inevitable. It's simple mathematics. It's 1 + 1 = 2. And if you don't have +1, you suffer. And so that disconnect, and that's what I was saying earlier on, that idea that even eons ago it was seen that humans had forgotten who we are and where we come from. It was very beautifully said that humans had become orphans of time and space. We've forgotten our creator. We've forgotten where we come from. We've forgotten our true home. And so inevitably we suffer. And so we look to do all of these things, the new car, the new iPhone. Do you have the 10, the 13, the 15? Did you update your apps? Did you get this thing? Did you get that? Did you post your meal on social media? How many likes do you have? Again, it's not that those things are inherently bad, but there's an emptiness to those things. And it's something that can only be fulfilled by that very deep longing for who we really are and where we come from. And I think that's what, as you said, very beautifully, that's what the spirit of going to a tree, of connecting to something that's outside the realm of humans. Because we live in cities at a bigger rate than ever, where all of our interaction comes with people or human-made things or human technology. And there's only so far that can go before we break, um, because we are more than our body. And I think anyone who's been around someone who's dying can understand that. When you look at a body that's laying after, however you want to say it, after the soul, after the spirit is gone, you can see that body is not the same. There's something that was there that's no longer there. Um, and I think there's a deep longing in people, and again, maybe rightfully so, people have become disillusioned from religion for potentially many good reasons, but just abandoning it totally also isn't fulfilling them. And I think we're very much seeing that in our societies now.
Yes, yes, they're throwing the baby out with the bathwater. And, the United States was founded on Christian principles. We're not talking about the Catholic Church or Christian church, but the principles. And the principles of Christianity also are very much about the development of the individual and the ability to not get swept up in whatever the mass delusion or ideology is. And so it's the antithesis of communism, socialism, these other more tyrannical frameworks of organizing civilization. And of course, those are wholly secular, atheistic. So
Mm.
yeah, we're in quite a time of lessons, hard lessons. And so this is why I just think people like yourself are, that it's no accident that you've incarnated at this time, that you are drawn to what you've been drawn to, that you have the ability to induct people into these deeper layers and really what is real. This is not made up imagination. Well, imagination's been completely dismissed. We actually need our imagination. It's every shaman has a very well developed one. But this is also what happens is the imagination atrophies in the kind of civilizations that we find ourselves in right now, as do the instincts, as does the intuition. And maybe you could talk about how important that intuition is and that imagination. I'd love to hear what you have to say.
It's huge. It's vital. Much like I was mentioning that story from the Witoto, the Bora people, that God gave tobacco to humans so that humans could dream the universe into creation, much like God did. It's literally saying that God dreamed the universe into creation, that all of this is a dream. Now, that doesn't mean it's not real. It is real. That's the principle of duality, that the world made manifest is real, but that there's something primary to that. And that's the realm of spirit. Um, we use words like we tell a kid who says, I want to be an astronaut when I grow up, or I want to do this. Oh, you're just dreaming, as if it's not real. We literally have built into our language that dreaming is not real. From the shamanic sense, they would say the dreaming is not only real, and that's not some strange idea. When I'm dreaming at night, who's dreaming? Me. There's no one else. The consciousness that's sitting here and talking to you right now is the exact same consciousness that I am when I'm dreaming. The difference, and why I think a lot of shamans would say that the dream world, not only is it real, but you could even say it's more real than this world, is because this world, as you said very correctly, it is real, which means we are bound by certain things. We're bound by in this earth, I'm bound by gravity, I'm bound by time, I'm bound by space, I'm bound by entropy. In the shamanic realm, in the dream space, I'm not bound by those things. I'm free in that way. I can travel to another dimension. I can be in another world. I can interact with someone that I'm not physically present with. I can interact with someone who may, in layman's terms, be dead. I can go to the future. Why? Because I have that ability. I'm not bound by time. I'm not bound by space. I could be an eagle in that space. I could be a panther. I could be a jaguar. I could be a non-human being. All of these things are potentialities. And that's where the imagination is also, I think, also what you're alluding to. It's very important, I think, especially in children, to really harness that imagination. And I think we spoke a little bit when I interviewed you, this idea of fairy tales, of myths, of legends, is it's taking us beyond the ordinary into the non-ordinary, into this realm of the imagination, into the realm of magic, into the realm of what's possible beyond time, beyond form, beyond space. And that is real. It's accessible. It's just not accessible in the base level that we're working with. And that's good. I can't be driving a car and imagining that I'm on some other planet, like I'm going to crash. But I think as more and more people are experiencing working with certain things, like certain plants, open us to that realm. And I think people who've gone very deeply into to certain plant work, you'd have a hard time telling them that what they experienced was not real. You'd have a very difficult time convincing them of that, especially when things begin happening that even your most rational mind can't begin to explain or to justify. And as you said, that idea of intuition, it kind of ties back to our idea that if we believe, and again, just going back to the same example of COVID, if you believe that everything is in the realm of man, that all knowledge is in its highest form the realm of man, which you said uh, that is the base of something like communism, of socialism, that man has the ultimate knowledge. Man knows more than nature how to dictate who goes where, who does what this price is, what's this, who are you, what's your role, rather than leaving that to nature, to God, for things to flow in the way that they intend to flow with. And that intuition begins to be cut. And then we're only existing, or we focus everything in the realm of mind, in the realm of rationality. This politician or this person or this pope or this guru is telling me this, therefore it must be true. And that's how we get lost. In kind of shamanic terms, that could be called black magic. That's a spell that's been cast. They're telling me that it must be true because it's the words they're saying. And I become dizzy. I become lost in that spell because in the realm of mind, it makes sense. You have a lot of very educated people who you can tell them something and they'll justify it. Even though if you told a far less educated person, but maybe someone who's much more connected to nature, that same thing, and that person would look at it and say, no, that's not true. But how do you know that? Why? Because I feel it. There's a deeper sense within me that knows that that's not true. And that sense of intuition is huge. And um, that's also, I think, the role of the shaman, of the curandero.
is to develop that wisdom. Like a group of people who I spent a long time with called the Shipibo, their word for ayahuasca is called uni. And so someone who works with uni is called an unaya. So uni, probably the best way to translate that would be knowledge, wisdom. And so someone who works with uni is someone who has wisdom. And what is wisdom? It's being able to decipher the polarities, being able to see what is good, what's bad, and to understand that, and then to move forward through that, to cut through that, like with a sword, cutting through the dizziness, cutting through the darkness, moving towards light. But if you can't decipher that, if you don't have the wisdom, which isn't, it's part of the mind, but it's also beyond the mind. And part of that is that gut sense, that felt sense, that sense of, for example, when I was serving people ayahuasca, in terms of dose, there are certainly things in the physical realm that you can go by. This is a big guy. He weighs 200 pounds. He's drank ayahuasca a million times. He's sane. He's really grounded. All of those would tell me I can give him a big dose. Someone who's really manic, someone who's very small in stature, someone who's never drank, the mind is going to say, give them a small dose because there's certain, again, qualities that are real that you can't avoid. But yet, those things aren't ultimately true in an ultimate sense, in that they're not, you can't replicate those 100 times out of 100 times. And so there's going to be a time where someone is coming up and sitting in front of me, and my mind is telling me, yeah, give this person this dose. That's the correct dose from them. But there's something deeper inside, that intuition, which comes from a different place, that's saying, no, you can only give them that much. There's no rational explanation from it, but there's an intuitive sense that's saying that's what they need. And if I don't listen to that, almost inevitably something bad will happen. Now, again, you can say in an ultimate sense what happens, what is good, it's happening, but that's on me because I wasn't connected to that intuition. There was something deeper that was speaking through me. However we want to look at that, spirit, my higher self, that the plants that I had worked with. And that's a huge part of this work. And it's not something that can even inherently be taught by another human being. It's something that has to be learned. It's something that has to be experienced. It's something that only through trial and error, through your own work, through your own deprivation, through your own wisdom, that you can develop that and then really begin to rely on it. This work has very scientific ways of going about it, much like any medicine. And there's something that's ephemeral, something that's intuitive, something that can't be spoken, something that can't be put into words, something that you can't necessarily teach. And that's a big part of this work. And that is that intuitive sense. And I think that's really what separates the wheat from the chaff, or whatever that experience, that expression is. That's only something that can be developed through your own experience, that intuitive sense, which is crucial for doing this work.
Yes, yes. And we are in a culture right now that discounts the intuition. And there's an old saying that goes, those who believe in nothing will fall for anything.
Mhm.
And that intuition is, you'll hear stories. My teacher, late teacher, Dr. Brew Joy, was at Johns Hopkins, MD, and he walked away from all of that to teach, and he was just an amazing teacher. But he would tell us we are multidimensional. Naturally, we are multidimensional. We have abilities that most will never, ever tap. And he would talk about physicians or surgeons they were highly, highly trained, but they would be whatever, doing some kind of procedure, and they would just know intuitively something. No, I have to do this instead. It's counter to what I've been taught. And sure enough, they would save the patient or whatever because of that connection to their intuition. And so it's a huge, huge piece with this, because there's also that necessity that we have to learn to trust our deeper intuition, our deeper knowing. And that really goes against kind of how we've been raised in this current culture And I think this is also what these plants teach us is, look, I'm speaking through you, not the way you humans speak, but yes, trust. This is what I'm telling you. And it is very different. Brew would say you have to shift states of consciousness in order to have these conversations.
And it's scary, and that's something that these plants will ultimately take us into is a very deep fear. And it's ultimately that fear of disconnection, that fear of death. It's safe to lie in a realm of reduction, of confinement, of control. Um, there's a beautiful quote by someone, I can't remember his name, but he said, most people don't want freedom, they want to be safe. It's very rare actually that people truly want freedom, which is, again, in the US, why I think we're giving up our freedom so quickly is because most people don't really want freedom is very scary. It's very scary. You work with any of these strong plants and they will take you into that fear where you begin to lose your sense of reality, where you begin to lose what's real, where even the floor that you're standing on can be taken out from under you. Your sense of self, your sense of literally the makeup of your being can be swept away from you. And then who are you? You're standing alone, vulnerable, scared, nothing to grasp onto. And yet, eventually, kind of like the archetypal hero's journey, when you emerge from those experiences, you come out much stronger, you come out humble, and you also realize that you have a power. I was reading a really beautiful book. We were speaking a little before we started, but I recently had a baby, and I'd never thought about this, but the more I kind of started researching and learning about the birthing process, I was kind of shown this idea that it's very much for a woman like a very strong plant medicine ceremony, and certainly seeing it made complete sense. But something someone said was really beautiful, which is that and again, there's it's not to say there's necessarily a right or wrong way of doing things, and all sorts of things can happen. Like people need a cesarean section, or people need to have induction. There's all sorts of real reasons why those things are necessary. But I think, kind of like we were talking about earlier, we've gotten to this place where now, like, the majority of births are done by appointments, by C-sections, by scheduling, by you can only stay in that room for an hour or 2 hours, and then the baby has to come out. And something this woman said was really beautiful, and it really resonated, is that's also robbing women of this initiation, that you get to this point where you think you can't do it, and yet eventually, in most cases, you will. And that initiation, that going into that ultimate point of struggle and then coming out on the other side, it's like an initiation that then you have this power. You realize, I not only could I do this, I did it. And it infuses that woman then with that power to prepare her for this role that she's about to step into. And I think much that way, it's a very powerful aspect of this plant work, is going into that fear, going into that darkness, emerging with power, with strength, with clarity, with humility. And then in that way, you're not as reliant on things that are outside of you, because you realize that what you needed, you had inside of you. Um, Points where maybe even the shaman or the curandero can't help you anymore. It's beyond the scope of his work, and it's just you. And, what's your faith in that moment? What's your resolve? What's your will? What are you willing to go? To what points of your body, your mind, your spirit are you willing to garner? And emerging from those experiences, that's why traditionally often these ceremonies were initiatory experiences. They were meant to bring people to the point of death, literally, but also metaphorically, so they would emerge as a man, as a woman, as a different role, as a teacher, as a guide, as a shaman, so that they could guide their people from a place of that connection, from that wisdom, and not from a place of authority or someone telling us what we have to do or what we can't do, or someone saying what's better or right or wrong for us. And I think that's also very much built into these plants. From my experience working with all of these plants, I mentioned this a little bit before, but very rarely are these plants telling us, you should do this, you shouldn't do this, you have to do this, you can't do this. Because again, that would just be another authority figure coming and putting us in the same paradigm. They're showing us possibilities. They're showing us what happens if you do this? What happens if you do that? What happens if you don't do this? What happens when you say something like that? What happens when you say something like this? And it allows us to feel that deeply, experientially. And then with that wisdom, it gently pushes us away and it says, okay, now go forth. And then we get to live by that wisdom, and we have to live by that wisdom again with the good and the bad of that. And I think in that way, these plants really begin to empower us, and they are an antidote to a lot of what you're speaking about. But we've been cut off from those rituals. We've been cut off from those ceremonies to where we don't have those opportunities to really develop those characteristics within ourselves that allow us to look at the world not from a place of fear, but from a place of humility, from a place of wisdom, from a place of manifesting our own destiny. And not in like a selfish way where, fuck everyone else, I'm just going to do what I want. No, because that also has a reciprocity to it, that has a consequence to it. But to really stand in an empowered place, making decisions that are the best for you. And ultimately, the decisions that are the best for you will be the best for other people because everything is interrelated. What's good for him is good for me. What's good for me is good for him. What's good for the environment is good for me. What's good for me ultimately is good for the environment. And if it's not, that's where something is out of balance. And it's not that we don't need experts or people to tell us that. That's part of that knowledge, that wisdom, that learning. But ultimately being able to be empowered to, much like as we said, to see through the Maya, to see through the veil, and then to be empowered to make those decisions.
Yes, yes. Really, these plants are the elders. They're the
Absolutely.
elders.
Yeah.
So when you were talking about these authorities, these outside authorities that are always trying to tell us how we should think and what products we should buy and this and and yet it's interesting because even like food wise, for the longest time, I followed the wisdom of Dr. Weston A. Price, who studied these traditional cultures and what they were eating, and I call it grandmother wisdom foods. And I have said forever, just follow the wisdom of nature and the ancients, and you'll be right as rain. Forget what the Huffington Post has to say. That's all propaganda nonsense, right? And so I just so love what you were saying. And when you were talking about, oh my God, I just lost the word. When you test yourself, what is the word? Oh my goodness. Um,
Initiation.
Initiation, thank you. Oh my God.
Mhm.
This is something that Brew, my late teacher, was also saying is we've lost initiation in the West and like formal initiation for boys and girls. And so what we've ended up with is an infantilized populace. And so this we need this initiation. And I think this is also why so many Westerners are flocking to places like Peru for this ayahuasca experience because they are really desperate for that meaning. And yes, of course, a lot of people are struggling as well with emotional issues, but ultimately to have this experience to go into a mystery and I see every one of these journeys as a type of initiation. I tell my own clients, you're initiating yourself. I will be midwife and guardian, but you're the one going in and we can't say what's going to happen. That's how initiation works. All you can do is hope you're prepared. And then in you go. and you get to kind of see what you are made of. And I love to quote that ending of The Wizard of Oz, and where the good witch Glenda says to Dorothy, after all she's been through and all the searching outside of herself that she did, Glenda says, "It was in you all along, Dorothy." And really, this is what you, I think, are speaking to, really is. And this is what the plants are wanting us to know, is that magic, what you're seeking. It's in there. You're one of us. In other words, we're all part of this great mystery called Earth, called nature. And every so often you get a big corruption, which is essentially what we're in. And then we have to, but it's almost like we're in myth right now. What we're living right now, this is mythic because this entire planet is imperiled. And so what happens at that time? Upspring people like yourself and the plants get their word in edgewise, and things start to change.
Mhm. Mhm.
So, wow. All right. So I'm glad you brought up the fact that you are a father. I didn't know if you wanted to speak to that. I would love to hear what that is like for you. It's only been, I think, a few days or a week, but my goodness, also coming into fatherhood with all of this initiation, this experience, this deep commitment and dedication and connection. So, how is that, do you think, going to inform you as a father? I'd love to hear.
Well, I hope it does.
I don't think it can't.
Yeah. I mean, it's really been it's been a whirlwind so far. I mean, the day that we closed our dieta here in Portugal, that's when my wife's water broke. So it was quite everything serendipitous, and you know, we were actually supposed to do this a week or two ago, but it's been like a blur from trying to prepare for everything to the birth, which was also quite strange. It was kind of like an initiatory experience for me too, because we did it naturally, but it was in a hospital. But the midwives and the doula we hired couldn't be there. There could only be one person in the room, so it was basically me. And I'm like, this is what I hired you people for, because I don't know what I'm doing, but there could only be one person in the room. That was the rules of the hospital, which we didn't realize. So that was, you know, and then just all the preparing and the learning and kind of sleepless nights for the last few nights. So I'm not even sure I can speak too much of it. But you know, I think a big thing for me was I think I never, well, I wouldn't say never, that calling to be, I think a father was never super prominent in me because I would hear people speaking about it as if it was like their life's purpose or their calling and they really wanted to. And I could never say that that was the case for me. Uh, and I think a big part was just because I had these other interests. I had these things that were also calling me that I knew I needed to do. And then I think in my life, I reached a point where I felt satisfied that I had done what I needed to do. Is there more to do? Of course, it's infinite. It's endless. Um, but also in terms of that idea of reciprocity, I think there was something in me that started feeling like I also needed to give back, and I needed to also honor that natural cycle of life, and that if I didn't do that, and again, it's no judgment, it was just for me personally, that my life wouldn't be fulfilled, it wouldn't be complete, that that was also a calling that I was being called to, was to step into that role, to give back in that way, to experience that other form of initiation and to experience giving life, raising life, passing life on. Um, that was also part of my own purpose of being here on earth, and that it was almost a higher calling than something of like I want this or I need to, or it was something that I felt I was really being called to do. And and it's still, you know, quite a mystery of how everything is going to unfold, where we're going to settle, how exactly it will look. But certainly, you know, seeing this beautiful boy being born, it's been magical. So I'm very much waiting and anticipating for all the things that I know are unfolding step by step.
If you were the only one in the room, did you deliver him?
Well, finally, I mean, it's kind of a long story, but I mean, it was quite clear to me she was going into labor, but there was no one around, and I'm trying to ask like the midwives there, like I think she's going into labor. They're like, no, no. Then they hook her up to this CTG machine, and they're like, no, no, the machine doesn't show it, so they leave. I'm like, look, I'm not an expert, but I'm pretty sure she's in labor. They're like, no, no, no. And then finally, like, I don't know, 8 hours passed. And I mean, like, she's going through a big experience. So finally, they hook her up again. And they're like, oh, yeah, we think she's in labor and we need to move her right away to the labor ward. Okay. So then we go and, but I think because it was a natural birth and I think a lot of credit to them, they basically left us there to do it on our own. I think there was also an emergency happening, we found out outside of there. So their whole team seemed to be somewhere else, not not where we were. But in the end, my wife did amazing. She was really incredible, and we really didn't need any support until the very end when the baby was coming out, just to have someone catch it and although that was also predominantly me and cut the cord, but just to have someone in the room to assure, I think me that everything was okay.
Yeah. Oh, that brings tears to my eyes. I am just so touched. And that's something also that I think we need to almost kind of bring back, is that sanctity of family, of fathers, of mothers. And because that has been the case forever and ever on this planet, that family unit. And, you know, through my reading and observation, that's obviously been a target of destruction and certainly in the West. And so this is something else I see you doing is I talk about this often, is this reclaiming. And so this reclaiming of connection to nature, to the spirits of nature, to those beautiful teacher elders. And also here you are now, I think really in a reclaiming of what it is to be a family, to be a father, to be a husband, a partner, and yeah, almost sort of bring back the dignity to that, which I think is so important because it's like divided we fall, and these divided families are imperiled, the children ultimately. And so yeah, I just can see you bringing all of that depth of wisdom to this new role. And yeah.
I think it's really important, and it's I think something we've kind of been speaking around, but I think we are, and again, it's as old as time itself, but we are always in a battle of light and dark, and certainly there always have been, and there always are, dark forces working, which, as you said, are trying to break up the family, are trying to separate. I mean, that is ultimately the force of darkness, which is separation, separating the family, separating our culture, separating ourselves from each other, separating nations, separating units. There's it's interesting in the West because we look at traditional cultures and we often like revel in them, like, wow, they have a culture, they have a family, they have a tradition. And yet for us, often if we look at that, we somehow see it as something bad. That we should not have a culture. We should be open to everything. And you know, it's interesting because also kind of this role I find myself in, as I said, is this role of bridge keeper. And I often find myself playing the devil's advocate, which is maybe part of your work too, with your kind of what we were talking about, the logos and the wisdom and all of these things. But like in the West, I often find myself kind of defending and sharing the wisdom of indigenous communities and indigenous cosmovisions. And then often in maybe those communities, or actually less those communities, but people maybe who idealize those communities, I find myself doing the other, which is really justifying Western civilization, justifying Western values. And going back to this teacher that I mentioned, Amika, he comes from this group of people called the Tubu, and they have this prophecy which they say we're living in the time of the Diro Amasan, which are the children of the new dawn. And they say it's these people who it's their time, and it's their time to bridge the medicine of the four directions to create a new Maloka. And the Maloka in the Amazon is the traditional ceremonial structure, it's the communal house, and it's also a microcosm of the world and the universe. And so it's saying that what's needed is people who can bridge the medicine of the four directions to create a new earth. And I think that's super important. And I think because probably a lot of this audience is Western, is to really, acknowledge that. And it's not me saying it, it's an indigenous guy from the Tubu saying that all directions have medicine. The West has medicine, the South has medicine, the East has medicine, the North has medicine, and that they're not any better or worse. They're different and they're balanced and they're in harmony. And that idea of separation is that idea of destruction, that ultimately what is good, what is truth, what is life-giving is union, is bridging those, bringing those together, honoring the medicine that every culture, every tradition has, and really, really understanding where you come from, understanding what are the values, also understanding what are the destructive qualities, like we were speaking about earlier, that any medicine, if it's taken too far to the extreme, it becomes poison, it becomes destructive. But also recognizing your medicine, because if you forget who you are, if you forget where you come from, if you forget your family, as you said, if you don't believe in anything, you're susceptible to everything. And so I think it's very important to really understand that and to bring that back. And I think we live in this amazing time where we can draw on the beauty of other cultures while at the same time honoring our own culture. And I think that's really the direction forward of creating this new earth. It's not abandoning our ways. It's not adopting someone else or something else. It's incorporating all of the beauty with the base of who you are and your own traditions. And much like as you said, I think ultimately that starts with the individual, with these initiatory experiences, with this deeper wisdom, understanding. It starts with our family unit, really having that strong, with our community. For example, like in the US, then our state, and then on the least level, the 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 federal level, this kind of conglomeration of states. And that's how, it was designed. And that's how all traditional societies were designed. The strength comes from you and from your family and from your community. And that's where you should focus your energy. And to a lesser degree, the higher you go up. And that it's not this top-down kind of authority, that it's ground up. And that it really starts with you, with the family unit, with the culture, with the structure. And that's vital. It's vital. It's vitally important. And I think, as you're saying, it's something in the West where we're moving away from. But I also see a lot of people, I think, coming back to that too. Like all of these things, the more extreme we go in one direction, the more we understand why these things are important.
Yes, yes. And in these more traditional communities, those who would have a leadership role would be selected by the wise within that community.
Mhm.
It wasn't just because they were in a prominent, wealthy family and so therefore would just sort of take on that role, but they were actually selected by the wise elders. Like, all right.
And it wasn't by your words. It wasn't by promising people things. It was, did you deliver? Wasn't I am the best hunter. It's are you the best hunter? Okay, let's see. How many animals did you bring back today? I am the best shaman because I say so. No. What are you able to see? What are you able to predict? Are you able to say, oh, that we're going to be attacked in 5 days? Yes. Okay. Now you have wisdom. Now you have value. It's not empty words. It's not empty promises. It's are you able to deliver? And And I think that is something that in the West we've, you know, it's beautiful because in these plant ceremonies they often speak. They use this word in Spanish, mareación, which means dizziness. It literally means seasickness. But they would say when you're under the influence of these plants, people would use this word mareado or mareación, like that you're under the effect of ayahuasca or tobacco. You're dizzy. You can't stand up. You're having visions. But I think in a much deeper level, we're all mareado, we're all dizzy, and these plants are trying to help us to wake up. They're trying to take us out of the dizziness of life. And I think that's where that work is so important, is that they're trying to help us to wake up, to see things as they actually are by embodying that wisdom. And again, not wisdom that comes just from words, but that's real wisdom, embodied wisdom, wisdom that can be felt, that can be seen, that can be heard, that's tangible. Um, and there's really no substitute for that.
What you're saying indicates a real love for us by nature, that we are like the human brethren to these other beautiful elements of nature. Because something else we're being made to think is that we are a cancer on this earth. And yes, humans get misguided and they do terrible things. They also do absolutely exquisite acts of great beauty and compassion and so yeah, this is something that has really been impressed on me through my work with the mushroom, is how dearly loved we are by nature, by the spirit world. They see our plight. They know we're under a spell to whatever degree. And so it's a matter of breaking the spell. That's what I see, the power of these plants. They have the power to break the spell, the dark magic spell, if you will, and bring us.
Absolutely. You know, in the Amazon, it was always so fascinating because it was often seen that the Amazon, and this is a bit controversial, what I'm saying, so you don't have to take it as truth. You can look into it on your own. But it was often seen that the Amazon was a pristine jungle and that, we couldn't touch it. We couldn't do anything with it because it's the lungs of the earth. Even just on a purely scientific level, that's not true. The oxygen that the Amazon gives up, it goes into the atmosphere above and then it comes down. So it's not like it's giving oxygen to all of the earth. But interestingly, the indigenous people would say that their cultures had existed for eons in the Amazon, and that they weren't always just hunter-gatherer people, that they came from civilizations, and that was often scoffed at by the outside world, until kind of unfortunately they started deforesting the Amazon, and more they're finding also through lidar, through deforestation, that there were very large civilizations in the Amazon. And interestingly, some of the people who really fought that science were environmentalists, because in their mind, if that information, which was truth, got out, it would mean that the Amazon wasn't as valuable as they were saying that. And again, all of these things are very complex. It's not that one side is good and one side is bad. There's a lot of layers to all of these things. But what these indigenous people also said is that they were guardians of this forest, that the forest didn't just exist outside of themselves, and that actually the forest thrived much more when there was a symbiosis of humans and plants, when that humans also were able to cultivate plants, because then they could actually propagate plants that were more beneficial, not only to humans, but also to animals, through the design, through the co-collaboration, that an even more beautiful forest could be created. So when they look, for example, at an ayahuasca vine, they don't say that it just appeared in nature that way. They would say that that vine was planted by a human, which means that because that vine is growing up that tree, that's the direct result of the human who planted it there. So there's all of these layers to that. And, interestingly, to make it even more complex, that vine is a creeper vine. And if you leave that vine unchecked, if humans don't use it, if humans don't cut it, ideally in a sustainable way, but eventually that vine will kill its host. It will kill the tree that it's growing upon. So that by having that symbiosis of humans, by cutting that vine, by using its medicine, you also save the life of the tree and you can propagate it even more. So all of these things, that symbiosis is super, super important. And I think, like you're saying, it's a very parasitic mentality that's being, I think, especially taught to young people that, as you said, that humans are parasites, that we're only bad and that the world would be better off without humans. That's not true. I mean, it's literally not true in the sense of any way of thinking. We live in a world of duality, which means there's two, which means there's manifest and unmanifest. Without the experiencer, without something to experience, there is no experience. So that idea, of human beings as an experiencer is something that's divine. It's something that's beautiful. And there's a reason human beings exist. And again, it doesn't take a rocket science to look and see that we're very different from all other life forms. Again, you can argue for the better or for worse, but we are very different. And there's a beautiful woman. Her name is Byron Katie, and she says it very beautifully. She says, when you fight reality, you lose, but only 100% of the time. So if you think that humans are a parasite, you're suffering because you're fighting reality. God put humans on the earth for a reason, for a divine reason. And we are humans. To hate oneself is the definition of insanity. No life form hates itself. You have to love yourself. That's the teaching, as you said, of Christianity. Love thyself. Love thyself as you would love thy other. Um, and I think, especially for young people, it's really causing a lot of distress. Now, again, you can argue that some of these things are coming from a good place. Should we care for the environment? Absolutely. Should we rein in the excesses of humanity? Absolutely. But you have to see the goodness of humanity. You have to see the divinity of humanity. And that was also, as you said, the role of the shaman. The shaman's role was to be good for his people. It was to heal his people. It was to cure her people. It was to be able to foresee the future, to call in, to plan, to be able to align, to bring order, to settle disputes so that his or her people could flourish, could thrive. And from that place of wisdom, there's going to be a deeper symbiosis of nature. Uh, the shaman has to have a respect for plants. Why? Because those plants are his teachers. Is he going to destroy all the plants? Is he going to make coca into cocaine and use chemicals to pollute the water that he's drinking? Absolutely not. The role of the shaman is someone who serves the good of his people. And I think in that way, it's also maybe a little different from some of what people may be more familiar with kind of these Eastern ideas of spirituality, of the guru who just kind of sits in a cave and meditates and achieves enlightenment. But even someone like the Buddha went out, or Jesus went out to also heal his people. Because it's not this idea of enlightenment just as something that's done for oneself. It's ultimately to bring that wisdom, to bring that knowledge to your people. So that a shaman, again, his goal is to serve his people, to heal them of their physical ailments, to heal them of their spiritual ailments, to allow the group to thrive, to flourish, to live in symbiosis with his environment so that everyone can flourish. But yeah, absolutely. Coming back to your point, it's, that idea, again, it comes from mareación. It comes from being lost in the dizziness of life. And, it's again, something you could go down a lot of theories about, like, is that being imposed from the top, or there are darker reasons behind that? Probably. And there's probably less nefarious reasons as well. But either way, that's a super, super destructive mentality, and it's causing suffering to a lot of people. And, interestingly, this kind of work, working with plants, just as you said, will show the beauty of yourself, of humanity, and to see that people are not bad at all, that people are amazing, they're beautiful, they're good. And that, as you said, the plants also want humans to flourish. They want humans to embody their medicine, to embody their wisdom. The spirit of chamomile or the spirit of elder or the spirit of hawthorn, it's also limited by its reality, by its form, by its static ability. If it can teach a human being who can then use the beauty of a human being, that mobility, that power of words, the power of action, to then go and bring that medicine to his people, to his environment, that to me is how that plant can truly thrive. And that's how it can truly embody its wisdom into humanity so that both can mutually thrive. And I think that's the highest form of reverence we can give to these plants. And so I think just to reiterate that, it's not at all that humans are bad or parasites, and that ultimately these plants are there to help to teach us that, to show us that, and to have us embody that wisdom.
Beautifully said. I can feel myself. I've been listening to you in the same way that I would listen if I was in the room with someone playing the piano or some instrument like beautifully, where you're just so drawn in. That's how I felt listening to you. And we're going to end here. And Jason, my goodness, you are just a fount of wisdom and delivered in such an easy way to receive, which is so important. You are such just a beautiful teacher, and I just know all who come to work with you are so lucky, so graced, and I just wish you every blessing with this new baby and just the wondrous way in which your life is changing and unfolding. And I just thank you for doing the work you do. Thank you for being who you are so authentically. And thank you for gracing myself and my listeners with all this good wisdom. Really deeply appreciated.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Shona. It's really been a pleasure, and thank you for inviting me and having me on. And as I was saying before, the conversation I had with you, I think was one of my favorites. So thank you for all you're doing. I imagine you do beautiful work, and one day I would love to work with you. And so I hope that happens at some point. So Virginia is still, it will always be home for me, whether I'm living there physically or somewhere else, but it could very well be physically. So if and when that happens, I'd love to meet in person and also to learn from you and your wisdom of working with mushrooms. And it's something that my wife feels more and more called to as well. So we may be some of your next students as well.
Oh, yes. Well, that would be a great honor. And absolutely for sure, when you are back in Virginia, we'll definitely get together if time allows. I would love that.
Yeah.
So thank you again, Jason.
Thank you so much, Shona. Thank you.
All right, everyone, that's it. I hope you enjoyed that conversation. It was really a pleasure for me to be on Shona's podcast. As I said, I think she's really a wonderful interviewer and just a really amazing person. So I hope you enjoyed that. If you did, also check out more of her work. Her podcast is called The Mushrooms Apprentice. It's a really good podcast, and I think there's a lot of really beautiful work that she's doing. As always, if you're able to support this podcast, Patreon is a really big help. You can sign up for as little as $1 a month. There's different tiers you can sign up for. Those tiers give you different things back, things like early access to shows, bonus material, Q&As. To all the patrons, to all the people supporting that way, as always, thank you very much for your support. It really means a lot. And if you're able to do that, thank you very much in advance. If you're not able to do that, as always, helping with some of the small things like the algorithms is a really big help. So if you're viewing this on YouTube or Rumble, hitting the subscribe subscribe button, turning on the notification bell, liking the video. And if you're listening to this on Spotify or Spotify and Apple Podcasts are the big ones, leaving a starred rating and a short review. So I think that's it. This is the last of a series that I'm kind of doing or releasing far in advance. So I don't have the schedule lined up of my next guest, although I am hoping to bring on a Shipibo maestro, an ayahuasquero, whose name is Purvis. We're trying to get that lined up. And as always, I hope to bring on some really fascinating guests. So I hope this finds you all well. Thank you very much for tuning in, and I will see you all on the next episode.